Once again, Professor Sky's Record Review has produced a horse hockey video in which he ranks his top 5 musicians or collectives within a certain field. In this case, his top 5 hip-hop groups. And since apparently he and I are embattled in a beef, I have to respond once again to give my ranking of the top 5 hip-hop groups. Now, I do expect you to watch his video first, as with all of these, because his video is the more, I'll call it historically accurate, as in the agreeable one, the list that most people would probably have. Honestly, going into his video, I predicted 4 out of his 5 picks, and I'm not going to talk about his picks almost whatsoever in this video. His number 1 pick I will end up mentioning because they're connected to one of my picks, but I'm not going to talk about his top 5 picks almost at all. So if you're expecting to hear the name of a group that is an obvious choice that I didn't mention, just know that I didn't mention it because you're supposed to watch Professor Sky's video, and if you haven't, that's why you didn't hear any mention of that group. Now, I would not consider myself any sort of hip-hop historian, not only because I'm too young, I was born in 1991, but also because I haven't gone that far back through hip-hop history in my research. I have listened to some old hip-hop. I know a lot about how hip-hop spread, what groups existed, but not what they actually sound like. I haven't listened to a ton of older hip-hop music. I've sampled here and there. There are some groups, some artists where I know some of their songs, but not a lot of their songs. Maybe I've heard one album, but not the rest of it. And so I'm going to give a lot of honorable mentions to groups that, whether Professor Sky mentioned them in his honorable mentions or not, I have at least heard enough of them to have some kind of take, but they're not going to be on my list just because I don't necessarily know them that well. So for instance, the Beastie Boys. I grew up with the Beastie Boys because their singles were all over rock radio for some reason. They did have a couple of rock songs. Sabotage is an all-time classic song. Intergalactic Planetary I remember seeing on MTV as a little kid and being one of the first hip-hop videos that really left an impression on me. But I just never got that into the Beastie Boys. I have heard a couple of their albums all the way through, and they're fine, just never got that into them. I can say they're an influence on me. You know, growing up hearing those voices definitely affected the way that I rap, but not a favorite. Bone Thugz-n-Harmony. You know, I've at least heard one of their albums all the way through. I've heard them as features on stuff. Like that one A$AP Ferg song, Lord, which is really, really good and was a big influence on me. So, like, even the little bit of Bone Thugs I've heard has affected the way I do chopper raps, particularly if you ever heard my song Dear Future. That one is very Bone Thugs influenced. But I don't know them well enough to put them on my top 5 list. Shout out to Justin Hunt, my favorite hip-hop journalist of all time, because they are his favorite hip-hop group of all time. There's a few that I have listened to quite a bit, and I don't know if I'd put them on my list just because they don't strike me as like favorites of mine, but CunninLynguists, Hieroglyphics, and Jurassic 5 are all classic intellectual hip-hop that I used to put on when I was like cleaning my room and stuff. It's just the good old boom bap of the late 90s that is made by a bunch of great lyricists. The Fugees. I only recently finally listened to a whole Fugees album, and it was really good. Just haven't gotten into them like that. Homemade Kazoku. This is one that you probably won't see on a lot of the lists of the best hip-hop groups because they are Japanese, and a lot of American journalists don't really listen to hip-hop from around the world, including myself. I don't know a ton of hip-hop from around the world, but Homemade Kazoku did the second opening theme for Eureka 7 and a bunch of Naruto and Bleach songs, and their music is fantastic. I saw them live at Otakon one year, just a really, really good group. They're kind of formulated in a way that's like the Beastie Boys, but Japanese, but they can rap their fucking asses off, and their production is really, really good as well. Onyx. I think the rules of Professor Sky's list were that each group has to have an in-house producer. And I assume that's why he didn't mention Onyx, because that's like one of his favorite groups. I don't know, maybe it just slipped his mind, but I was like, how did Professor Sky not end up talking about Onyx when he always says their first album is one of his favorites? I haven't listened to that much Onyx, but the song Slam is an absolute all-time god-tier single, in my opinion. The Roots is another group that I really appreciate. I love Black Thought. I've heard a lot more of Black Thought on his own than I have of The Roots, but The Roots are fucking great, particularly as a live act that is almost uncomparable. If you listen to some of their live albums even, they just sound amazing. Geto Boys, I've only heard a little bit of, but they are very influential. Candlesticks in the Dark, Visions of Bodies Being Burned, which that's going to come up a little bit later. So those are the groups that I haven't really listened to that much. And then there's a few more groups that I have listened to more when I was younger, and so I have to shout them out. Of course, the Black Eyed Peas. will.i.am, one of the most influential legendary producers of all time. I had Ella Funk as a kid. I listened to it quite relentlessly. Returning to it today, a lot of it holds up really well, particularly just because the songs are so well structured and constructed. Like, they are definitely more like, pop or rock songs than traditional hip hop, but they have rapping all over them, and they're just like incredibly well formulated songs. And I feel like not enough hip hop is like that. I think it's something that the genre could use a little bit more of. The Lonely Island. Yeah, the comedy group from Saturday Night Live. Andy Samberg, Akiva Schaffer. The other guy whose name is slipping my mind. I remember Akiva because he directed that new Naked Gun movie, which is really, really good. The Lonely Island were hit or miss, not always funny, but I listened to the Turtleneck and Chain album pretty relentlessly in my late teens. I'm on a boat. Take a good hard look at the motherfucking boat. They had features from like everybody imaginable. And some of those songs were really funny, and some of them were definitely very influential on me, like Trouble on Dookie Island. I also have to shout out Injury Reserve. Just an incredibly solid, very experimental, unique hip-hop group from Arizona. I've never been as into them as a lot of other people are, but I appreciate them. They have a few songs that are forever songs, everybody knows. All This Money, fucking oh shit. Like, when they do their fun, exciting songs tends to be more what I show up for. Some of the experimental stuff I like. Jailbreak the Tesla was really good. But they are not as much for me, but I think that they are very similar to some of the stuff that is on my list, and it would kind of be shocking if I didn't mention them at all, considering what is on my list. And one more group I have to shout out is the Ultramagnetic MCs. I've only listened to very little of their music, but I mostly checked into them because Kool Keith comes from them, and Kool Keith is, in my opinion, the greatest legend in hip-hop, somebody who needs to have books written about him, who needs to be studied, and who never gets talked about. Now, if there's a group that is in Professor Sky's honorable mentions and I didn't mention them even though they are a really big group, it's just because I don't really listen to them or haven't really investigated them like that. And if there's a group that is in Professor Sky's top 5, assume that I know about them, I think they're great. I'm just not going to mention them because he already talked about them. So, let's get into my top 5. At number 5 is Czarface. Czarface, I love Czarface. So, if you watched Professor Sky's video, as I assume you did, then you know his number 1 choice was the Wu-Tang Clan, and Wu-Tang is obviously nothing to fuck with. They are one of the all-time greatest rap groups ever. Almost everyone in Wu-Tang Clan is like a legendary rapper. I don't know why I threw the almost in there, because I can't think of somebody who doesn't count, but the Wu-Tang Clan are all legends. So, Czarface includes Inspectah Deck from Wu-Tang, along with 7L and Esoteric, and they're all great rappers. But more importantly, they have really strong theming around the whole comic book angle, which Wu-Tang Clan, they pulled a lot of comic book references. They are sort of proto-nerdcore, because even though they rap a lot about street stuff and about, more traditional rap lyrics that are just showing off how well you can rap, there is so much nerdy reference to kung fu movies and comic books and video games and stuff like that. And MF Doom also kind of carries that attitude, where obviously he's got the, Victor Von Doom imagery all across his albums, makes a lot more nerdy references. And somewhere between those two things is where you get Czarface. Czarface, I mean, if you look at the album covers, they look like Doom album covers. Kool Keith also did a lot of the comic book reference stuff, actually was doing Dr. Doom even before MF Doom was doing Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom, truly the most influential character on hip-hop of all time. And Czarface has collaborated with MF Doom while he was alive. They've collaborated with Kool Keith. They've collaborated with other members of the Wu-Tang Clan. And truly what I love about them is that they are carrying that torch into the modern day. Czarface have pushed the nerd part of the Wu-Tang Clan, the nerd part of MF Doom and Kool Keith, to the zenith. They have truly written the most hardcore, nerdcore bars imaginable. And they're rapping at the top level, so you're hearing the absolute best rapping about nerdy shit that you're ever going to hear from Czarface. Their albums are fun, they're wacky, they're full of like little interstitials and skits and stuff like that. Even to this day, when those kind of things are not popular. They have a new album on the way that had 2 singles that I listened to in the car the other day and thought were fucking fantastic, and apparently feature the rap personality of Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy is collaborating on their new album, and they're making, modern Marvel movie references and stuff, and talking about video games and just all the nerdiest shit in the world while sounding like top level rappers. Personally, I would consider myself a bit of a nerdcore rapper. I don't always do nerdcore specifically, but when I get into my nerdcore bag, I pull the deepest imaginable references, and I feel like Czarface is at the top of the nerdcore game, so gotta shout them out. All right, my number 4, 666, 666, 666, smoked out, know I'm high, really high, man, I'm about to shout. 666 Mafia, 3-6 Mafia, if you will. Now, I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of 3-6 Mafia music I have not heard yet. They were pretty prolific as a group, and the members of the group have been prolific on their own. But particularly the Underground Tapes Volume 1, the 1991 to 94 collection, 96 collection, something like that. The early 90s collection is so fucking good. I listened to it many, 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 many times. 3-6 Mafia is one of those groups that I had not heard people really talking about in the 2000s or the early 2010s, but then they became a major part of the conversation when their sound influenced like everything in 2010s hip-hop. Like the triplet flows, the dark kind of trap sound, the whole Memphis energy, the use of like repeated phrase sampling. Like there's so many things that are very distinct about 3-6 Mafia's sound that then became commonplace aspects of hip-hop, and like stuff that wasn't being copied that heavily in the 90s, where it's like maybe you'd hear a rapper from somewhere other than Memphis do like a little bit of a Memphis sound, but when you listen to Memphis music, it's like tremendously in this vein. And I don't know that 666 were necessarily the progenitors of this sound, but they were definitely the popularizers of the Memphis sound. They are the one that when people learn about this type of music, they are inevitably going to hear 3-6 Mafia as one of the first things they hear. I remember in one of the early Denzel Curry interviews where he's really talking about his influences, talking about having downloaded the entire unreleased underground, UGK, and 3-6 Mafia discographies. I forgot to mention that duos don't count in this list. Again, I assume you watched Professor Sky's video, so you know the rules. But yeah, duos are not going to be mentioned in this video. That's why UGK is not on here, or Outkast, or any of that kind of stuff. I assume Professor Sky will do a duos video, and then I'll have to respond to that and add Run the Jewels or whatever. But yeah, 3-6 Mafia, legendary group, tremendous influence. Somewhat before getting into them, I had gotten into Lil Ugly Mane, and Lil Ugly Mane's first album, Mr. Thug Isolation, is pretty much just like a dead-ass send-up of the 3-6 Mafia sound, and he did a lot of production on like early Raider Clan stuff and helping to popularize this southern rap revival. Lil Ugly Mane himself being from Richmond, Virginia, which doesn't have a hip-hop culture. Probably the closest one is Memphis. So, you know, meanwhile down in Florida, where you had the whole Raider Clan coming from, they have a hip-hop culture from Miami, and that eventually got incorporated into Denzel Curry's sound. But I think they were more so pulling from a little bit further north. It's funny that Memphis is considered like southern rap because it's not that far south. If we're talking about the United States map, Miami or Louisiana, those sounds should really be what we considered southern rap, or even Texas. But, you know, Memphis is considered south, and so 3-6 Mafia is one of the most influential southern hip-hop groups. Never mind that LA is further south. I love 3-6 Mafia, but I also love so much of what they influenced that it almost felt inevitable that I would go back to this and go, oh, this is the birthing place of so much of what I like. And I also really like what a lot of the members of the group did afterwards. You know, Gangsta Boo, Rest in Peace, was always a fantastic feature on different songs. Juicy J still has a really great solo career. Project Pat has finally started getting more recognized for being a really influential MC. Lord Infamous, also rest in peace. You know, Denzel Curry used to shout him out all the time because he basically was like, yeah, that's who I'm doing. I'm doing a Lord Infamous, you know, impression, so to speak, in his early music. Anyway, yeah, legendary group, doesn't get enough credit, but I think that is starting to change ever since the 2010s. All right, now my top 3 hip-hop groups, I considered just grouping all 3 of them together under one umbrella because all 3 of them are in a specific style that I think a lot of the fans of these groups would be fans of all 3. And the only reason I didn't group them all together is that I wouldn't have been able to come up with a top 5 of like groups I actually really listen to if I didn't include all 3 of these. And frankly, they're my 3 favorite hip-hop groups. Now, all 3 of these groups also have something in common that makes them a little bit odd to think of as hip-hop groups, because Professor Sky's rules were that a hip-hop group has to have at least 3 people, and it should have in-house production. He did not mention how many rappers there need to be. Like, does more than one member of the group need to rap? You know, he talked about some groups in his video where there are 2 rappers and a producer. He did not talk about any groups where there was just 1 rapper and 2 producers. And when I was in chat for his video, I mentioned Clipping, and he said, that's a great group that I forgot to mention. And I thought, okay, well, if Clipping counts, then all 3 of these groups count, because they're all 3 groups with 2 producers and 1 rapper. Clipping is my number 3. Clipping is one of the most influential groups on me. I would actually say that me deciding to start making beats, like to start trying to be a producer, is largely influenced by Clipping because of hearing about their process, where they were just taking random fucking noises like shit on their desk, you know, taking a cassette tape, opening and closing it, and then making that into part of the beat. Now, Clipping is an extremely high-tech band, where the 2 producers will use like every machine you've never heard of to create sounds. They usually have like a whole desk full of bullshit, and they're just making like the weirdest, most fucked up noises possible, but very clean. Like, for being a noise group, their noises are very cleanly done, and everything is clipped heavily because obviously with harsh noise, it could be incredibly grating and wear on the speakers. But they clip all of their noise so that it exists in this very thin channel. You know, you can turn your speaker all the way up because it's not going to get destroyed by the sound because it's been clipped so hard. That's why they are clipping. But of course, the MC is the true star of clipping, which is Daveed Diggs, otherwise known as Thomas Jefferson and the Marquis de Lafayette in Hamilton. And it took a long time before I actually heard Hamilton, in spite of having been a clipping fan long before Hamilton was a thing. But it is really fun to go back to their first album and hear Daveed talking about being Disney on these hoes. Shout to all my Mickey Mouses, knowing that Disney was going to end up owning Hamilton, and he probably knew that at the time. Daveed Diggs is the cleanest dirty rapper. He is a guy who raps about every kind of like macabre, insane image in his head while being like a human teddy bear who says things in interviews like, I've never really been bored or depressed in my whole life. Yeah, Daveed is the least gangsta rapper, but he is the best hip-hop storyteller of all time. When the conversation comes up about storytelling in hip-hop, there is not nearly enough mention of Daveed Diggs. And I assume it's because most people have never listened to clipping because they hear it and they go, well, this is fucking weird. And they don't really investigate the lyrics and what is being done there. But clipping are a storytelling band. Daveed Diggs has a hard rule, never use the word I in any of the raps. He raps about characters. He raps sometimes about you. Like he tells the story from a second person perspective. But every single song has a very distinct narrative and characters and vibes, and they're all fucking great. You know, sometimes he can be a little bit corny, particularly like their newer album, the Cyberpunk one, has some parts where it's like funny, you know, or silly, but sometimes it's really hard and rough and grotesque. If you've never heard any clipping, I highly recommend the song Story off of their first album. There is also Story 2 off of their second album. Each album has a numbered story song. Stories 1 and 2 will make you fully understand why I say Daveed Diggs is the greatest hip-hop storyteller. Because they are basically short stories, like written fictions, you know? Like, I guess they would be considered flash fictions, but there's more than 55 words in those songs, but less than 1,000, and nonetheless he tells these very complete, compelling stories with memorable characters, with big plot twists. And story 2 is only like a minute and a half, and yet it's like so dramatic it'll get your heart racing. Masterful storytelling. And also he just has a great distinct voice and can rap in basically like any flow at any speed, and can rap over the craziest sounding shit you've ever heard in your life. Like, a lot of what clipping makes is not really strictly beats. It's literally noise. And Daveed will find a pocket and rap over fucking a squeal, like a metallic squeal, and he's just killing it. So yeah, Daveed Diggs, one of my favorite rappers. Clipping, one of my favorite groups. The fact that there are 2 numbers higher than clipping has nothing to do with clipping being less than God tier. It only has to do with this being my genre. Like, this is the type of music I listen to the most. And to be fair, even, I would say I probably listen to clipping more frequently than the other 2 bands I'm going to mention these days. But these 2 bands are so influential on me, so important to me, that I cannot possibly put them lower. And I keep saying bands because particularly number 2 is a band. Number 2 is Death Grips. It's death. Yeah, I am not only a huge Death Grips fan, I'm kind of known for being a huge Death Grips fan. to an extent where I got a lot of people into Death Grips. Obviously, I am second tier to Anthony Fantano, who probably did more to introduce people to Death Grips than anyone else. He gave their albums incredibly high scores during a time where he didn't give that many things incredibly high scores. I think The Money Store might have been his first 10 out of 10. So, you know, Fantano put me on to Death Grips. He put a lot of people onto Death Grips, and then I continued that legacy and made videos calling them the best band of the decade and just mentioning them all the fucking time. So I'm pretty associated with my own Death Grips fandom, and particularly when I was in my 20s, this was what I was listening to the most. And it's not even like I was always into like harsh noise and loud chaotic music. I would actually say that I was kind of dipping my toes into that realm through clipping and Death Grips. I got into them about the same time. But it was a period where I was going through a heavy dissociative kind of mindset where it was really hard for me to like kind of connect and stay focused and be a part of the world and find energy in music. I was listening to a lot of kind of faded out into the background type music, and a lot of the stuff that other people listen to kind of associate that's like in the death metal vein and stuff like that, or power violence, that kind of stuff was like legitimately scary to me, you know. And Death Grips was a little bit scary at first, but there's enough like groove, enough fun in it. And I remember that I played The Fever for a friend of mine, and he just got the hooks in his head. He kept walking around going, "Hey, hey!" And like he was like, "Play the hey, hey song again," you know? And so I put on The Fever until I got to a point of like realizing this is a fucking pop song. Like as weird as it is, as off-putting as it is at first, structurally, this is a verse, chorus, verse song with a big magnetic hook and, you know, a bunch of memorable lyrics and stuff. And then it's like, oh, they're not trying to make the weirdest sounding music possible. They're trying to make the weirdest sounding accessible music possible. And that's what got me into Death Grips, was realizing this isn't just like, you know, it's not just blast your face off music. It's blast your face off music that you can kind of dance and thrash to and sing along to, and it's memorable and it's funny, and it also kind of just doesn't sound like anything. Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff that's influenced by Death Grips since then. Stuff like Machine Girl that had a lot of obvious influence from the more electronic side of Death Grips. Stuff like Cities of Eve that has, I don't even know if he's necessarily directly influenced by them, but certainly sounds a lot like them in his delivery. You know, MC Ride is the vocalist for Death Grips, and the way that he performs is just so over the top and unhinged and loud and abrasive. And yet when you actually read the lyrics, they're fucking gorgeous. Like, Death Grips lyrics are some of the most evocative, strange, poetic, like unique lyrics you'll ever hear in the genre. And, you know, he's blasting them at max volume, just kind of shouting, and like people mostly kind of remember the really funny or weird or left field bars. But like when you actually sit down and read a song, particularly off the first album, when he was being a little bit more hip hop and a little bit less just like madness, there's so much evocative imagery and just powerful messaging and stuff that really like gives you pause for thought in Death Grips lyrics, which is not usually what people are doing when they're listening to Death Grips. Is not thinking. They're just going completely apeshit to these insane sounds. And you know, you have Flatlander, who is a absolute master of sample selection, and you have Zach Hill, who is the craziest drummer of all time. Zach Hill is in about 1 billion bands. I love most of those things. I haven't necessarily heard everything he's done or listened to him like religiously, but any Zach Hill project I've stumbled upon, I've been like, this is fucking awesome. This is some weird, interesting, awesome shit. And he plays drums like he is trying to destroy his body. He plays the drums. I mean, if you've ever seen the video of him playing drums in handcuffs for like 20 minutes until his wrists are bleeding, this man is trying to destroy himself through a drum kit. And what makes Death Grip sound so unique is that, if you watch them live, Zach Hill is just playing like a live drum kit, like sort of over their music. And I'm pretty sure that how a lot of it is created is either Zach just sequencing sounds that Flatlander found him, or playing an E-kit with weird noises plugged into it. Like, for instance, the first half of The Powers That Be, Björk, like, sent Death Grips a sample pack of Björk sounds. And so, fucking, seemingly what happened is that, all of the Björk samples got plugged into different parts of this E-kit, and Zach Hill is just manically drumming Björk noises. So, like, rather than drums, you just hear Björk noises played in the most absurd, like, sequencing. As MC Ryan says things like, "My dead mother in my dreams. Remember when December blew her ashes off my jeans? Off these jeans! Some things only I have seen. Some people only I have been." Yeah, I could get way too hyped if I start quoting Death Grips here. Phenomenal group. One of my all-time favorites. Not my number one hip-hop group, because I have to give that distinguished honor to Dälek. If you don't know Dälek, you don't know Ball Like That. Dälek is the original, premier, noisy, experimental, atmospheric, industrial hip-hop group. They've been around since the late 90s. They are still putting out albums, even this year, and they have a very distinct sound that I would almost want to call it post-hip-hop, not because it is like post as in afterwards, but because it is the post-rock equivalent of hip-hop, to an extent where they were touring with post-rock groups like Mogwai and ISIS when they first came out, because nobody wanted to hear them at hip-hop shows. They were too different from hip-hop to perform in a lot of those places, so they ended up performing along with rock acts, and particularly weird ones at that. But Dälek has this wall of noise sound where, like, the drums are usually pretty, like, standard boom bap drums, just, like, really heavy, because they have to cut through this absolute wall of sound that the producers, two guys, are putting on in the background. And then you got MC Dälek himself rapping over top of it. If we're talking about poetic, evocative, meaningful lyrics, Dälek is at the pinnacle. I think the fact that their lyrics are so good is a big part of what makes me consider them one of the greats. There's a lot of stuff that has been in my head for decades that comes from them. And really, Dälek, I would credit with getting me into hip-hop as an adult. Like, as a kid, I liked funny rap songs. I liked the funny Eminem songs, the funny Missy Elliott and Ludacris songs. Like, whatever had like an entertaining music video was usually what got my attention. It was rare that I was really like keying into the messaging of the lyrics so much as just if they are fun to rap along to, I was going to get into it. But when I was in my later teens, I was really into music, and I was mostly into like progressive rock and post-metal and stuff like that. And my cousin had given me like a shitload of burned CDs that I then burned onto my computer, and basically just like copied his music taste onto my own. So this is the period when I started listening to King Crimson, who I mentioned in my top UK bands. This is when I was really into the Mars Volta, who I mentioned at the top of my US bands. And this is when I discovered Dälek through their album Abandoned Language that my cousin had given me. And I love Abandoned Language to death. I would still consider it one of my like top 5-10 favorite hip-hop albums. It's so fucking thick with atmosphere and grit, and again, these evocative, meaningful lyrics that talk about hip-hop history and cultural history, and this need to preserve language, to respect and preserve the language itself. It is hip-hop about what hip-hop does. It's hip-hop about the sense of loss that comes from feeling like what hip hop is doing is being tarnished or its true capability is diminishing, and this need to kind of, encase it and protect it under, as much layer of grit as you possibly can. Bred in 5 boroughs and East Coast signatures, subterranean verses emerging in mass quantity beneath this asphalt below the concrete, bred in basements where only real men speak. This is the kind of stuff that Dälek was rapping about on Paragraphs Relentless from that album. They are legends of experimental hip-hop. Every single album they've made is something different, where they have like the Untitled, that's just 1 hour-long unbroken song. They have stuff like, if you listen to From Filthy Tongues of Gods and Griots, where like there's a 12.5-minute just like dark, possessive noise track in the middle of it that will fucking take your brain and just sink you down into the depths. I don't think you get a lot of the experimental hip-hop that was going to come later without going through Dälek first. They set so many standards, they did so many interesting things that they paved the way that something like a Clipping or a Death Grips or an Injury Reserve can exist. And I'm not even saying that any of those pulls directly from Dälek. I don't know that Injury Reserve are Dälek fans necessarily. I would be shocked if Death Grips and Clipping weren't. But if you're listening to something like Backwash, it's hard not to see it as like all of this comes from the fact that Dälek was doing this at a time before anybody considered this to be a thing that could be done. And they opened this lane. And I don't even think it was seen as a lane for a long time because they weren't really successful. They weren't like, influencing tons and tons of people. But eventually more stuff like that started to emerge. And I think that they helped to propagate it. And they never get props. Almost nobody talks about Dälek ever. They are truly underground. And they deserve a lot more mention than they get. I don't know that they would be seeking any kind of fame or fortune, but they definitely deserve the props for being the OG experimental industrial hip-hop group that, again, is still doing it. So yeah, Dälek's my number 1. And that concludes my rundown of my favorite hip-hop groups. I still plan to make more videos in this vein. I did not do my top 5 Japanese rock bands yet. I thought I was going to have more time. I didn't know Professor Sky was going to drop more horse hockey on me so soon. But I will be doing a top 5 Japanese rock bands because a lot of people requested it. And I will, maybe do a top hip-hop duos or even a top rappers individually eventually. But, for now, I'm just following in Sky's footsteps and rekindling the beef. Hey, Sky, you want to know why we really have beef? Because almost 2 years ago, I sampled you heavily in a song, and I didn't tell you about it. So now I'm going to play that song.
This might blow your mind, okay? I might sound like some freaky deaky hippie, but this is like backed up by Einstein and other dudes, and right? So light is a wave and a particle.
Cooking in icy winds in my third eye's future vision, and a booking at the prison, but I'm on stage like Johnny Cash gave Mary Johnny Cage, had a trans baby from the butt gravy and the rage, 10 pages, 1 phrase, written in repeat, all playing no work till the weed depletes, bleep, 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 Jody Greep, help me sleep, sheep, leap, 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 to the beat, 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 weep, 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 in my pillow and grind my teeth, please, 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 tonight, I don't really need these streams.
So it is both something that does not have mass,
How long you gonna
and something that has mass. Please, people in the comments, tell me more about this. Explain what I said wrong. But the basic idea is this. Light is a pretty weird thing in the world of science because it can be 2 things at once. 2 things that maybe it shouldn't be at once. Light has that kind of wave-particle duality. It is a wave about love, just gorgeous, the kind of song you want to dance to with your lady or your friends or whatever. whatever, you know?
How long you gonna sit and wait for Gato? How tightly are you throttling that bottle right now? Mightily the fallen wish to rise again. How and when depend on if they wise enough to set a trend. Upend everything relentlessly, repentantly. Extend acceptance openly and lastingly, tremendously. Do not accept dependency upon the abuse. You must use your own hands to refute. Pound the earth and scream and play. This is the most important thing. And every day that you forget to do it, you will fucking waste. You will fucking waste.
How can it be both things at the same time?
Pound the earth and scream and play. This is the most important thing. And every day that you forget to do it, you will fucking waste. You will fucking waste.
That's what Kendrick can do. That's what a few artists can do. And that's what this song is to me. But I'll give you a little story about the first time I heard it. Long conversation about the rap scene in Rochester and the new Snoop album. I have the best part. And so, my son got his haircut as well. And I'm like, all right, well, let's listen to this, huh? Because, he's a big Kendrick fan too. And we listened to it. We just sat there in silence. And I think what he said was pretty meaningful. Because what he said, I think this sounds like something we'd hear on Hot 97.